The man who never looked up. The first sound anyone heard inside the factory wasn't the machinery. It was a mop bucket rolling across polished concrete. Every morning at 4:17, long before the first shift clocked in, a lone cleaner crossed the empty production floor beneath rows of humming fluorescent lights. His pace never changed. Not when winter winds rattled the loading docks. Not when summer humidity settled over the steel beams. Not even when deadlines pushed the night crews into overtime. Most people couldn't have described his face. They only knew the gray maintenance cart with one loose wheel that squeaked every few meters. The name stitched above his faded Navy work shirt read, Daniel. Few people ever used it. To the newer employees, he was simply the cleaner. The factory itself seemed older than memory. 3 generations had worked beneath its roof. The concrete carried decades of forklift scars. Yellow safety lines had been repainted so many times they formed uneven layers like rings inside a tree. Overhead cranes rested silently until daylight, while rows of stamping presses stood motionless in the half-light, waiting for another day of noise. Daniel moved among them as if walking through a familiar neighborhood. He never rushed. Every spill disappeared before anyone noticed it. Every aisle looked exactly as it should. Every tool left out overnight somehow found its way back to the proper cabinet before dawn. No one questioned how. Cleaning crews were supposed to be invisible. Daniel seemed comfortable with that. Almost. He always paused beside press number 7. Never for long, just 3 or 4 seconds. His mop remained still while he tilted his head ever so slightly, listening. Then he continued working. The security cameras would have shown nothing unusual, but if anyone had stood close enough, they might have noticed something strange. His eyes weren't watching the floor. They were following the machine's breathing, the gentle vibration, the rhythm inside the hydraulic system, the tiny inconsistencies most people never realized existed. Machines, Daniel believed, spoke long before they failed. You simply had to learn their language. At 5:02, the first maintenance technician arrived carrying a paper cup of coffee. Miguel had worked there nearly 20 years. He nodded toward Daniel. Morning, Daniel smiled faintly. Morning, Miguel yawned. Gonna be another long day. Daniel glanced toward press 7 without answering immediately. You might want to ask someone to check the left spindle bearing. Miguel frowned. Why? Daniel shrugged, dipping his mop into the bucket. Just sounds tired. Miguel chuckled politely. I'll mention it. He probably wouldn't. There were dozens of machines, hundreds of maintenance requests. One cleaner's observation wasn't exactly high priority. Daniel simply nodded. He wasn't offended. He had learned long ago that advice landed differently depending on who delivered it. By 7 o'clock, the factory transformed. Forklifts beeped through crowded aisles, compressed air hissed from assembly stations, steel coils rolled into position with deep metallic groans. Operators greeted one another over the growing roar of machinery. The silence of dawn vanished beneath organized chaos. Daniel disappeared with it. Not physically, socially. Workers walked around him without meaning to. Conversations continued as though he occupied a different layer of the building. A few thanked him after he'd emptied overflowing bins. Some smiled. Many didn't notice him at all. He wasn't angry, just accustomed to existing at the edges of everyone else's day. Across the production floor, a young process engineer stood staring at a digital dashboard that refused to cooperate. Her name was Maya Brooks, 27 years old, fresh from graduate school, bright enough to solve equations that filled whiteboards, less experienced when the equations became people. The production manager folded his arms. We're losing efficiency again. I know. The consultants blamed operator inconsistency. I'm checking the calibration. They checked it already. Maya rubbed her forehead. Then something else is changing. But what? No one answered. The line kept running, slightly slower than yesterday, slightly louder than last week. Not enough to stop production, enough to bother someone paying close attention. Later that afternoon, Maya found a folded sheet of paper tucked beneath her keyboard. No signature, just neat handwriting. Line 3 conveyor tension is uneven. It isn't software. Check roller 18 before replacing another sensor. She frowned. Who had left it? There wasn't even a name, only practical instructions. She almost threw it away. Instead, curiosity won. She walked onto the floor with a technician. Roller 18 had developed a slight alignment issue. After a simple adjustment, production efficiency climbed back to normal. The technician scratched his head. That's odd. What is? No sensor problem after all. Maya unfolded the anonymous note again. Whoever wrote it had been exactly right. The following morning, another note appeared. Different handwriting? No. Same careful lettering. Cooling fan on compressor B is pulling uneven current. Check before Friday. Again, no signature. Again, no explanation. Again, the inspection revealed the exact problem. Not catastrophic, not dramatic, simply accurate. Maya began asking questions. Nobody admitted writing the notes. Maintenance supervisors denied knowing anything. Operators joked about having a factory ghost. An older machinist laughed. Maybe the building's finally teaching itself. The joke faded. The mystery remained. Daniel continued cleaning, always arriving before sunrise, always leaving quietly, always listening. One evening after most of the second shift had gone home, he stopped beside an aging hydraulic press. He rested one hand lightly against the warm steel housing, closed his eyes. Some people listened to music, some listened to conversation. Daniel listened to vibration. The machine carried a faint metallic flutter buried beneath the normal rhythm, barely noticeable, almost impossible to hear. Almost. He reached into the pocket of his work shirt, removed a small notebook, worn smooth around the edges. Its pages weren't filled with grocery lists or reminders. They contained dates, machine numbers, temperatures, bearing lifespans, oil viscosities, pressure fluctuations, tiny observations gathered over years. No one had ever asked to see it. He wrote one new line. Press 7, left spindle bearing. Estimated failure, 72 hours. Then he tucked the notebook away, not because it was secret. 2 days later, the bearing failed. Production stopped. Not violently, not spectacularly, just enough to halt the line. Maintenance crews surrounded the machine. Miguel stood quietly, remembering a brief conversation before sunrise. Sounds tired. That was exactly how Daniel had described it. Nothing more, nothing less. Later that afternoon, Maya requested maintenance records. Nothing unusual. She checked inspection logs. No scheduled prediction, no diagnostic alert, no sensor warning. Then she remembered the anonymous notes, the handwriting, the precise observations. A coincidence once was luck. Twice was unusual. 3 times demanded an explanation. She gathered every unsigned note she could find. Each one solved a problem before anyone else recognized it. Each one written in the same careful script. Each one folded exactly the same way. Only one clue connected them all. A faint gray smudge in the lower corner. Not grease, floor cleaning solution. Maya looked through the office window toward the production floor. Far below, Daniel pushed his squeaking maintenance cart between silent machines preparing for another night. He paused beside press number 7, not to clean it, just to listen. For a few seconds he stood perfectly still. Then, almost under his breath, too quietly for anyone nearby to notice, he murmured, "This one isn't finished yet." Maya watched from above. For the first time since joining the factory, she wasn't looking at a cleaner. She was looking at a question. And she had the unmistakable feeling that the answer had been hiding in plain sight all along. Echoes inside the machines. The factory sounded different after the bearing failure, not because the machines had changed, but because Maya had. She found herself listening instead of merely looking. The digital dashboard still streamed numbers across bright screens, but now she caught herself pausing beside conveyor motors, noticing the rhythm of chain drives, the uneven click of a worn gear, the low whistle of compressed air escaping somewhere overhead. She wasn't hearing what Daniel heard. Not yet, but she was beginning to understand that every machine carried a story long before it became a problem. The anonymous notes continued arriving, never on consecutive days, never asking for recognition. Only observations. Cooling pump vibration increasing. Lubricate the guide rails before Friday's production run. Check the insulation on motor 4 after the weekend shutdown. Every note proved accurate. The maintenance team stopped laughing about the mysterious advisor. Some even started looking forward to finding the folded slips of paper each morning. Still, no one knew who was writing them, except Maya. Or rather, she suspected she did. She simply couldn't understand why a cleaner possessed knowledge that rivaled the plant's senior engineers. One rainy evening, long after most employees had gone home, Maya stayed behind reviewing production reports. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the high warehouse windows. Water streamed down the glass, blurring the orange glow of the parking lot lights. She looked up just in time to see Daniel passing the office with his cleaning cart. On impulse, she stepped into the hallway. "Daniel?" It was cautious, as though being addressed by name had become unusual. "Yes? I was wondering if you have a minute." He glanced toward the production floor. "My shift's still going." "It'll only take a minute." He nodded. "The break room?" The break room was nearly empty. A vending machine hummed in one corner. A coffee pot sat warming what had long ago stopped tasting like coffee. Rain drummed softly on the roof above them. Maya poured 2 cups anyway. Daniel thanked her with a small smile. For several moments, neither spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. Finally, Maya unfolded one of the anonymous notes and placed it on the table. "I think you wrote this." Daniel looked at the paper without touching it. "I did." No denial, no hesitation. She blinked. "You aren't even going to ask how I figured it out?" "You already did." "I followed the handwriting." He gave the faintest shrug. "I've never had particularly interesting handwriting." She laughed despite herself. "No, you haven't." Another silence settled between them. Maya leaned forward. "How do you know these things?" Daniel wrapped both hands around the warm coffee cup before answering. "I pay attention." "That's more than paying attention." He looked through the rain-streaked window instead of at her. "I've been inside this building a long time." "How long?" "A little over 30 years. Maya frowned. "I thought you joined the cleaning staff 6 years ago." "I did. But before that?" His fingers tightened around the cup. "I worked upstairs." That answer only deepened the mystery. "Maintenance?" He shook his head. "No." "Production supervisor?" Again, no. After another long pause, he quietly replied, "Engineering." The word landed softly, yet it seemed to echo through the empty room. Maya stared at him. "You were an engineer?" Daniel smiled without humor. "A long time ago." She searched his face, looking for some sign that he was joking. There wasn't one. "But why are you cleaning floors?" Instead of answering, Daniel asked a question of his own. "Have you noticed that old stamping press near Dock 3? The green one. Originally blue. You know that?" "I picked the paint." Maya felt a strange chill. Daniel continued. "The conveyor feeding it used to jam twice a week. We redesigned the roller spacing, increased output by nearly 12%. He spoke without pride, almost like someone remembering where an old tree used to stand. She whispered, "We? My team." The next afternoon, curiosity overcame professionalism. During lunch, Maya visited the plant archives. Most of the records had been boxed years earlier, after several ownership changes. Dust covered nearly everything. Old maintenance manuals, engineering drawings, employee newsletters, photographs from company picnics and retirement ceremonies. Then, she found a faded annual report from 23 years earlier. Inside was a group photograph. A line of engineers stood proudly beside a newly installed production line. Young faces, dark hair, confident smiles. Maya almost missed him. Third from the left, Daniel, at least 30 years younger, wearing safety glasses and holding a rolled blueprint beneath one arm. The caption identified him simply: Lead Mechanical Engineer, Daniel Mercer. She looked back and forth between the photograph and the man she now knew pushing a mop through the factory before sunrise. It didn't make sense. Not yet. The following evening, she found Daniel replacing a torn trash liner near Assembly Line 2. "I found your picture." He froze for only an instant, then continued working. "I figured you might. You really were the lead engineer. I was part of a good team. Why doesn't anyone know?" Daniel tied the trash bag shut before answering. "Because people retire." "You didn't retire." "No." "What happened?" He rested both hands on the cart handle. For a moment, Maya thought he wouldn't answer. When ownership changed, they brought in consultants. She waited. They wanted younger engineers, different software, different management style. "They fired you?" "No. They offered relocation." "And you refused?" "My wife was sick." His voice remained calm. "Travel wasn't possible. Neither was moving. So, they eliminated my position." The words contained no anger, only fatigue. "I still needed health insurance." Maya's eyes dropped. "So you took the cleaning job. It was the only opening. You never tried engineering somewhere else?" Daniel looked across the production floor, where sparks briefly flashed from a welding station. "Some opportunities disappear. while you're busy taking care of someone else. For the first time, Maya noticed what Daniel never mentioned. He wore an old wedding band. Its surface was scratched from decades of work. She asked quietly, "Your wife?" He nodded once. "She passed away 4 years ago." "I'm sorry." "So was I." Neither spoke for nearly a minute. The silence felt respectful rather than empty. Finally, Daniel smiled. A small, genuine smile this time. "She used to say machines were easier than people." "Were they?" He chuckled softly. "No." Weeks passed. Their conversations became part of the night shift. Sometimes they discussed bearings, sometimes old production methods, sometimes nothing important at all. Daniel never lectured. If Maya asked a question, he answered. If she didn't, he let the quiet remain. One evening, he stopped beside an aging hydraulic press. He placed 2 fingers lightly against its frame. "Listen." "I don't hear anything." "You hear noise." He closed his eyes. "Now listen for rhythm." She tried again. At first, nothing. Then, a faint hesitation. Almost like the machine skipped a heartbeat before settling back into its steady pulse. "I heard something." He nodded. "What was it?" "A pump compensating for pressure loss." "You can tell that?" "I've heard this machine almost every day for 30 years. The answer wasn't boastful. It was simply true. As they prepared to leave, Daniel's expression changed. His attention shifted toward the far end of the factory, toward the oldest production line in the building. He listened. Longer this time. Much longer. The warmth left his face. Without speaking, he removed the familiar notebook from his pocket. Instead of writing immediately, he stared across the vast factory floor, where conveyors disappeared into shadows beyond the overhead lights. Finally, he wrote a single sentence. Then he closed the notebook. Maya noticed his hand trembling ever so slightly. "What is it?" Daniel looked toward the aging machinery. His answer came almost as a whisper. "The problem isn't one machine." He paused. "It's several." He glanced toward the ceiling where pipes, cables, and steel supports stretched into darkness. "If I'm right." He stopped before finishing the thought. Maya waited. Daniel slipped the notebook back into his pocket. His voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. "We don't have much time." The name behind the blueprint. Daniel barely slept. The sound he had heard the night before followed him home, lingering in his mind long after the factory disappeared behind him. It wasn't a single faulty bearing or a worn gearbox. It was a pattern. Machines that had once operated as one synchronized system were beginning to drift apart. Tiny timing errors had accumulated over years of repairs, upgrades, and replacement parts. Individually, none of them seemed dangerous. Together, they formed something far more serious. By dawn, Daniel was already back inside the plant. The familiar squeak of his cleaning cart echoed through the empty aisles, but this morning he wasn't looking at the floor. His eyes moved from conveyor chains to hydraulic lines, from motor housings to electrical cabinets. Maya found him standing beside the oldest transfer line in the factory. "You came in early," she said. "So did you." She noticed the notebook in his hand. "You were right, weren't you?" Daniel nodded. "I hope I'm wrong." Vibration changes, hand-drawn diagrams, tiny notes written in careful handwriting. Maya slowly turned the pages. "This isn't a notebook, no. It's a history of the factory." Daniel looked back toward the building. "I never intended to keep it this long." Together they walked onto the production floor, instead of interrupting the managers. Daniel quietly handed Maya a sheet of paper. On it, he had drawn a simple diagram connecting 6 different machines across 3 production zones. None of the machines appeared related, until the arrows were added. These upgrades were done years apart, Daniel explained. Different suppliers, different motor speeds. Every repair solved one problem, but changed the timing somewhere else. Maya studied the sketch. The delays are adding together. Exactly. That's why no single machine looks broken. Daniel nodded. They're no longer speaking the same language. Maya carried the diagram into the engineering office. At first, the room was skeptical. One supervisor questioned the assumptions. Another pointed to computer models that showed no critical faults. But when Maya suggested testing the timing sequence instead of replacing more sensors, the maintenance team agreed to try. They had run out of better ideas. For nearly 4 hours, technicians moved through the factory. Motors were synchronized, guide rails adjusted, conveyor speeds recalibrated, hydraulic pressures balanced. One correction alone accomplished almost nothing. Together, they transformed the entire production line. At precisely 4:18 that afternoon, the line restarted. Everyone watched. The first product moved smoothly onto the conveyor, then another, then another. No hesitation, no unexpected pauses, no warning lights. Only the steady, confident rhythm the factory hadn't heard in years. Even the machine sounded different, calmer, almost relieved. The production manager folded his arms and quietly exhaled. He never finished the sentence. He didn't need to. The answer was running right in front of him. News spread slowly, not as gossip, as realization. An older electrician approached Daniel near the tool room. "I remember you." Daniel looked surprised. "You trained me when I was an apprentice." The electrician laughed softly. "I didn't recognize you with gray hair." Daniel smiled. "Neither do I some mornings." Later that day, another employee stopped him. "You designed the cooling system on line 2, didn't you?" "I helped. My father used to talk about that project." By the end of the week, stories began surfacing from workers who had been at the plant for decades. Some remembered solving impossible breakdowns with Daniel. Others remembered him sketching ideas on scraps of cardboard during overnight maintenance shifts. Many younger employees listened quietly, surprised that the man who emptied trash bins each night had shaped so much of the building around them. Daniel accepted every conversation with the same humility. He never corrected anyone who exaggerated his role. He never expanded on his accomplishments. He simply thanked them and returned to work. A month later, Maya unlocked a forgotten storage room beneath the administrative offices. Dust floated through shafts of afternoon sunlight. Shelves held boxes of outdated manuals and rolled engineering drawings. Against the far wall leaned several framed photographs wrapped in old paper. She carefully uncovered them. One photograph showed the factory's original engineering department during the major expansion years. Daniel stood among them, young, confident, holding the same thoughtful expression he still carried decades later. The frame had never been hung after the company's ownership changed. Somewhere along the way, history had simply been packed into storage. Maya carried it upstairs. The following Friday, employees gathered briefly before the morning shift. No speeches had been planned. No ceremony had been advertised. The plant manager stepped forward holding the old photograph. "I've spent the last few weeks learning something I should have known years ago." He looked toward Daniel. "This factory remembers its machines better than it remembers some of the people who built them." He paused. "We're going to fix that." The photograph was placed on the wall beside portraits of past plant leaders and engineering teams. Beneath it, a small engraved plaque read, "Daniel Mercer, lead mechanical engineer. His work continues in every line that runs today." The room remained quiet, not because anyone expected applause, because the moment deserved something gentler. One by one, employees nodded toward Daniel before returning to their stations. It wasn't admiration from a distance. It was recognition among equals. Daniel's job title never changed. He asked that it wouldn't. "I've got enough paperwork behind me," he joked. Instead, something else changed. Every Thursday evening, after production slowed, a handful of apprentices gathered around the oldest machines in the plant. Daniel showed them how to feel vibration through a steel housing, how to recognize the smell of overheated insulation before an alarm sounded, how to hear a failing bearing beneath the noise of an entire factory. He never began with formulas. He began with patience. "The machines will tell you what's wrong," he often said. "But first you have to earn their trust." The apprentices smiled, unsure whether he was talking about equipment or people. Perhaps he was talking about both. On his way out one evening, Daniel pushed the same old cleaning cart toward the exit. The loose wheel still squeaked. The fluorescent lights flickered behind him as the factory settled into another quiet night. He paused beside press number 7. The machine hummed with a smooth, steady rhythm. Daniel rested his hand lightly against the warm steel. For several seconds he listened. Then he smiled. Not because the machine was perfect. Machines never were. But because someone else inside the building had started listening too. Behind him, Maya stood beside a young apprentice. She tilted her head, closed her eyes for a moment, and said softly, "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Maya smiled, remembering the first lesson Daniel had ever given her. The rhythm. Daniel walked toward the parking lot without turning around. The evening sun stretched long shadows across the concrete, while inside the factory, the steady pulse of the machines carried on. along with the knowledge of the quiet engineer who had never stopped caring for them, even when the world had forgotten his name. What he left behind. Autumn arrived quietly. The maple trees beyond the employee parking lot turned shades of amber and deep red, their leaves gathering along the chain-link fence every morning before the maintenance crew swept them away. Inside the factory, the seasons mattered less. The rhythm of production continued much as it always had. Day shift replacing night shift, forklifts tracing familiar paths across the concrete, and the steady heartbeat of machinery filling the vast building. Yet something had changed. People greeted each other more often. Not because management had introduced a new policy, because they had been reminded that every person inside the building carried a story no job title could fully explain. Daniel still arrived before sunrise. His gray maintenance cart still squeaked around the same corners. He still cleaned the floors before anyone else arrived. But now, when workers passed him, they slowed. "Morning, Daniel. How's Press 7 sounding today? Would you mind looking at something after lunch?" He answered every question with the same calm patience. If he noticed the difference, he never mentioned it. Maya's office had changed too. The digital dashboards were still there, displaying production rates and efficiency graphs, but one wall now held something different. Old engineering drawings. Not because they were useful for daily operations, because they reminded everyone that good engineering wasn't only about software or calculations. It was about observation, experience, listening. One afternoon, Maya noticed a new apprentice studying one of the drawings. His name was Ethan, 19 years old, fresh out of technical school. He looked overwhelmed by everything around him. She smiled. "First week?" He nodded. "I thought I knew machines. And now, they're bigger than I expected." Maya laughed. "They're also better teachers than most people." He looked confused. She pointed toward the production floor. "Come on." Daniel was kneeling beside an old conveyor motor when they found him. Instead of repairing it, he was simply watching. Ethan whispered, "Is something broken?" Daniel looked up. "No." "Then why are we here?" Daniel stood slowly, brushing dust from his knees. "What do you hear?" Ethan listened. "The motor." "What about it?" "It sounds normal." Daniel smiled. "Describe normal." The young apprentice hesitated. "I don't know." "Exactly." Daniel rested a hand on the motor housing. "If you don't know what healthy sounds like, you'll never recognize unhealthy." He stepped back. "Listen every day. Even when nothing's wrong, especially then." Over the following months, Thursday evening training sessions became something of a tradition. No attendance sheets, no presentations, no projectors, just a handful of apprentices following Daniel through the factory after production slowed. Sometimes the lesson lasted 5 minutes, sometimes 2 hours. One evening he asked them to stand silently in the center of assembly line 3. Nobody spoke. The conveyors rolled steadily, air compressors cycled on and off, hydraulic pumps hummed beneath the floor. After nearly a minute, Ethan finally whispered, "I still don't know what I'm supposed to hear." Daniel nodded. "Good." The group looked puzzled. He continued, "People rush to answer questions before they've learned how to ask them." Another minute passed. Then Daniel pointed toward the far end of the line. What changed? This time Ethan heard it, a faint metallic tapping, barely noticeable. "It's slower now." Daniel smiled. "A loose chain guide." "How did you know?" "I've heard this line for 30 years. The apprentices exchanged glances. It sounded impossible, yet every prediction Daniel made eventually proved correct. Not because he possessed extraordinary talent, because he had spent decades paying attention. One rainy afternoon, a delivery driver wandered into the maintenance shop looking for directions. He noticed the framed photograph hanging on the wall. "Who's the engineer in the middle?" Before Maya could answer, one of the welders smiled. "He's cleaning the hallway." The driver frowned. "The engineer? The cleaner? The same person?" The welder nodded. "Best one we've ever had." The driver looked genuinely confused. "But why is he cleaning?" The welder shrugged. "You'd have to ask life." There was no bitterness in his voice, only quiet respect. As winter approached, corporate headquarters announced another modernization project. Consultants arrived carrying laptops, laser scanners, and ambitious schedules. The employees exchanged uneasy looks. They had seen this before. One afternoon, a young consultant approached Daniel while he was emptying recycling bins. "Excuse me," he asked politely. "Can you tell me where the engineering office is?" Daniel smiled. "Second floor." The consultant thanked him and hurried away. Maya happened to witness the exchange. She almost corrected him. Daniel gently shook his head. "Leave it. But he doesn't know who you are. He doesn't need to." Later that day, the consultant presented a proposal recommending the replacement of an older conveyor system. After the meeting, he walked through the production floor carrying a tablet. Daniel stopped beside him. "Mind if I ask a question?" "Of course." "If you replace that conveyor, how will you compensate for the weight difference entering line 4? The consultant blinked. "We'll adjust the timing." Daniel nodded. "And the hydraulic delay?" The consultant hesitated. "What hydraulic delay?" Daniel smiled kindly. "The one hidden beneath the floor." Within minutes, they were studying original construction drawings together. The consultant wasn't embarrassed. He was fascinated. By the end of the afternoon, he admitted, "I've spent 3 weeks modeling this system." Daniel folded the blueprints. "I spent 30 years living with it." The young consultant extended his hand. "I think I still have a lot to learn." "So do I," Daniel replied. "That's the nice thing about machines. They keep teaching." Several weeks before Christmas, the apprentices surprised Daniel. They had restored the old notebook he carried every day. Its worn leather cover had begun to split with age. Without changing a single page inside, they carefully repaired the binding and added a protective cover. Inside the front page, they tucked a handwritten note, "And everything you taught us to notice." Daniel stood quietly for a long moment. He traced the edge of the notebook with one thumb before looking up. "I've received awards before," he said softly. "They're all in boxes somewhere." He held up the repaired notebook. "This one I'll carry." On the last workday of the year, snow drifted gently outside the factory windows. The final shift ended earlier than usual. Workers collected their coats, wished one another happy holidays, and headed home to their families. Daniel remained behind for a few extra minutes. He walked once more through the silent building, not inspecting, simply remembering. He paused beside press number 7, the same machine where Maya had first noticed him listening. He rested his hand against the steel. The vibration was steady, healthy. Behind him he heard footsteps. Not one person, several. He turned to find Maya, Ethan, Don, Miguel, and half a dozen others standing nearby. Nobody had planned a speech. Nobody held a plaque or certificate. Miguel simply smiled. "We figured you shouldn't be the last one leaving tonight." Daniel looked around the quiet factory. For years, he had believed that legacy was something written on blueprints or engraved on nameplates. He understood differently now. Legacy lived in people, in careful habits, in knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Together, they switched off the final row of lights and walked toward the exit. Outside, fresh snow covered the parking lot. Behind them, the factory rested in silence, waiting for another morning. And when the machines woke again, there would be more than one person who knew how to listen.